people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. Over the weekend, young Bri Howling of Canada racked up another highlight reel knockout, advancing to a professional record of 6 wins with no losses, no draws, 2 recorded knockouts. 2, her power is coming along, as stated. This fight for Bri Howling was just a maintenance fight, a keep busy fight, because she hadn't fought in a while. She only fought once last year. Let's hope she fights a lot more this one. And because this fight took place so early in the year, that does leave the rest of the calendar open for young Bri Howling to have other fights with other fighters campaigning in the women's bantamweight division. Bantamweight, that's where Miyo Yoshida holds the IBF title. Dina Thorslund, she's got the WBC and WBO titles. And Nina Hughes, she's got the WBA.
It's Women's Month.
So the good people at Top Rank post this image with the only two female fighters they have under contract, former champion Michaela Mayer and current reigning unified minimum weight champion Senicia Estrada. I feel like Bri Howling would fit right in among them. I feel like Bri Howling would be a good addition to the Top Rank stable, but Top Rank, they don't sign female fighters as frequently as Matchroom does.
Or Golden Boy.
We all know that Matchroom hosts one of the more robust stables of female fighters. Several fighters from several divisions, several countries. Golden Boy Promotions, they've signed anyone from Areli Musinho to Marlene Esparza to Gabriela Fundora.
They used to promote Senicia Estrada.
Point is, they've signed several female fighters, more fighters than Top Rank has, and I feel like Top Rank should look to expand on their stable of fighters.
Bri would be a good addition.
Matchroom as well, if they went as far as signing an Australian fighter in Ebony Bridges, then what's the harm in signing a Canadian one in Bri Howling, who's a bit younger, a lot younger, has more good years to give to the sport of boxing, has a fan-friendly style, it's made for television, she's mean-spirited, goes for the knockout when a knockout is there.
She's angry.
Though unfortunately, she's been averaging 1 fight a year for the last 4 years or so. She fought once in 2020, once in 2021, once in 2022, once in 2023. And as talented as she is, she's just not getting out there enough.
I'm sure that she'd like to.
It's not necessarily her fault. It's what a fighter faces when they don't have a major promotional engine behind them. Opportunities are scarce. In fairness, beating Noemi Bosquez, even knocking her out, that's expected. I expected that from Bri Howling, and I said as much in my prediction video the week before.
She's got to target bigger fish now.
Line herself up for one as she climbs up those ranks by way of the World Boxing Council, by way of the WBC, former WBC champion of Mexico, Yuli Hangaluna. She's ranked at number 1. That's by way of the WBC. By way of the WBA,
Brittany Sims is ranked at number 1.
By way of the WBO, Serene Satine.
She's ranked at number 1. And by way of the IBF, Shurita Metcalf. She's ranked in the top spot.
So who should she go after? Well, I don't think she has anywhere near enough experience for the likes of Mexico's own former champion, Yuli Hangaluna. Could be a while before she's ready for a fight like that. She should go after either Brittany Sims, Serene Satine, or Shurita Metcalf.
Those are much more winnable fights.
And I happen to think Bri Howling has a higher ceiling, more ability than those fighters do, more layers to her game. I would give her reasonable odds against Brittany Sims, Serene Satine, or Shurita Metcalf. And in fighting them and potentially beating them, that would line her up to fight for a title. It's not necessarily something she has to do right away, but it's something you want to see happen within the calendar year.
Now that she's had a little takeover fight with Noemi Bosquez.
Congratulations to her for advancing to a professional record of 6 wins and no losses with no draws, 2 knockouts this past weekend. Hopefully they can get her back out there in a jiffy. This past weekend, in the main event of what was a top-ranked show, we saw Ford versus Kholmatov for what was the newly vacated WBA title.
An excellent fight.
A fight of the year candidate to some, with ebbs and flows and back and forth. At times, Kholmatov is having it all his way. At times, Raymond Ford was having it all his way. I had Raymond Ford down. I had him down by at least 1 or 2 rounds going into the 12th. So the fact that his power was able to carry over so late into the fight, scoring a clutch victory, a clutch knockout.
The way it looked like Kholmatov had more firepower. Looked like he punched harder than Raymond Ford, but Raymond was more durable. He was wearing the punches better.
He endured. Bad cut on his left cheek. I believe it was his left cheek. Blood all over the place. But he endured. Showed wherewithal and stick-to-itiveness. Effective mid-range.
Good hooks, mid-range to inside, good power.
He was the away fighter in this thing. He's a matchroom fighter on a top-ranked show. Were some gripes about the stoppage in some circles, small ones, that the referee could have and should have allowed the contest to go on. I don't agree with that. Kholmatov was visibly hurt. He was on unsteady legs, spaghetti legs. At one point, he turns his back
In the 12th.
all the way around, visibly rattled, visibly shaken, retreating from Raymond Ford and stumbling into the ropes where Raymond corners him, gets in 1 or 2 punches, and the referee waves it off. He was right to do it.
Only 10 seconds left on the clock.
It was impressive. And matchroom impresario Eddie Hearn was in attendance for the match. He has said he wants to make Raymond Ford versus Nick Ball as a WBA and WBC featherweight world title unification fight on the Queensberry versus Matchroom 5-for-5 show
This summer.
on June 1st in Saudi Arabia. If Nick Ball, Queensberry Promotions' Nick Ball, beats Ray Vargas to win the WBC title on Friday.
This Friday?
It snuck up on us, I know. This Friday is the Joshua versus Ngannou fight. The Joshua versus Ngannou fight where Nick Ball will be vying to become a world champion on the undercard. And he might just do it because Ray Vargas, he's been out for a year, over a year.
A look at that fight.
Ray Vargas hasn't had a fight since he dropped the decision to Oshaki Foster at super featherweight.
Wait a minute, he's coming off a loss, and how is he a champion?
Because the fight was at super featherweight. Ray Vargas still holds a WBC title at featherweight, where this weekend's contest is taking place. Losing a fight at 130 did not affect his status as a champion at 126. But he hasn't fought in a year.
Right.
And he hasn't actually made featherweight in close to 2 years. The last time that he fought as a featherweight was against Mark Mixayo in July of 2022. We're in 2024.
Do you see what the problem is?
He hasn't fought in a year, so there's going to be ring rust, and he has to boil all the way back down to 126, which he hasn't made in a long while. And while he is a far more experienced fighter than Nick Ball, Nick is not the kind of fighter you fight off a long layoff. Nick Ball is best described as a mid-range to inside pressure fighter, an aggressive one, a strong one, who's going to push you to the brink, push your physical limits.
I like Nick Ball's chances against Ray Vargas, and I like Raymond Ford's chances against Nick Ball.
If they can do this, because they're playing it close to the chest. You're having a fight in early March so that you can be ready for another one, a unification match, at the beginning of June. That's tight. That's pushing it. But the money might be worth it.
That's Saudi money.
You know, immediately after the Kholmatov fight this past weekend, Raymond Ford talked about potentially moving up. But if they can do this fight in a jiffy, if they can get it done quickly,
It's another banger.
it's another action fight. That's what that would be. Raymond Ford versus Nick Ball.
That's fireworks.
But Nick Ball's got to hold up his end of the bargain first. He has to secure the W this upcoming Friday. He has to pry the WBC title away from Ray Vargas.
Easier said than done?
We'll find out. Things are shaking, rattling, and rolling in the men's featherweight division, where there are 4, count them 4, reigning champions. Can we narrow that number down?
Before this year is out.
Can we see a unified champion crowned? And perhaps an undisputed champion later on in the year?
We'll see.
In men's super middleweight news, Canelo Alvarez's fresh talks with Al Heyman's PBC have reportedly included the possibility of reviving his 3-fight deal to now face Jaime Munguia in May, then Jermall Charlo in September, both on Amazon Prime Video pay-per-view, but nothing has been agreed to as of yet, according to Sports Illustrated's Chris Mannix.
Terrible.
This whole thing has been a roller coaster the last 7 days or so. Reports that Canelo was going to terminate the PBC deal early, just one fight into it, that he might go back over to Matchroom and DAZN. Now the rumor is that...
Rumor has it Eddie Hearn offended Eddie Reynoso, Canelo Alvarez's longtime trainer and manager. Many are left to wonder, what is it that Eddie Hearn could have said?
What did he say to piss him off? And at least according to Rick Glacier, who first reported on this rumor, he said, quote, "You're basically really just a trainer."
Ooh.
Whether or not that was even said and what led up to that verbal exchange, because that's what it sounds like. Your guess is just as good as mine. These are rumors and should be treated as such.
But on the premise that it's real and he really said that.
No, I don't imagine that Eddie Reynoso, who's been handling the career of Canelo Alvarez, the most successful boxer in the sport right now, I don't imagine he took kindly to that. The amount of time and the number of years he's put into the sport, not just in the career of Canelo Alvarez, but some other fighters, lest we forget, he's the one who's supposed to be brokering the deal for Alexander Vajdik to face David Benavidez.
To have somebody tell you something like that?
You're just a trainer. That's all you are. You're just a trainer. I don't imagine Eddie Reynoso is used to people talking to him in that fashion. Eddie Hearns' ego versus Eddie Reynoso's ego. And now what we're hearing is that as a result of that, Canelo's back on the PBC side of things. He's going to fight Jaime Munguia, and he might fight Jermall Charlo in September.
Fuck that fight.
This is what I'm talking about. This is what I've been saying. How is it that Canelo Alvarez could strike a multi-fight deal with Al Haymon and David Benavidez isn't part of the deal? He wasn't part of the deal when the deal was initially made last year, and he still doesn't seem to be part of the deal now. And you ask yourself, well, Canelo Alvarez, he's got some blame in it too. He should be pushing for it.
I don't disagree.
I think there is some truth to that, but what you must also realize is that when you're already the top earner in the sport, when you're already the top draw, when you're already making more money than everybody else doing what you're doing, the sense of urgency is not going to be the same for Canelo that it should be for David Benavidez, for Al Haymon and his PBC.
It's like people are stupid or something. They don't want to understand that.
They can't understand. The guy's gonna make 8 figures regardless of who's opposite the ring. So the sense of urgency for him, there is no sense of urgency. He makes that with David or without David. Thus, the sense of urgency has to come from David. It has to come from his team. It has to come from Al Haymon because he's the one structuring the deal, giving Canelo Alvarez these options. And Jermall Charlo is still in play. You still want to make a fight with that guy? Look, May or September, you can't sell that thing. Public perception of Jermall Charlo has plummeted year after year. He's little more than a drug addict.
A junkie.
A bum. You're wasting the paying public's time trying to do that fight in September. The fight you should be pushing for in September is a David Benavidez fight.
It stands to reason
That if Al Haymon isn't going to push for this thing, who is? Because he's the one giving Canelo options. He's the one structuring the deal.
I don't get it.
And if Canelo Alvarez, who nobody has their thumb on anyway, there's no way Canelo fights a Jermall Charlo unless he wants to fight a Jermall Charlo. Al Haymon can structure the deal, and Al Haymon can offer you Jermall Charlo, but he can't make you fight him. You don't fight that guy unless you want to fight that guy, and if you want to fight that guy, you're wasting everybody's fucking time. Cash cow or no cash cow.
I don't understand.
I just feel like this sequence of fights is made possible because Al Haymon is keeping Jermall Charlo in play, and Canelo Alvarez, Canelo himself, he doesn't feel that sense of urgency.
Not after all these fights and all these years and all this money.
He doesn't, so here we are. That's a tough sell. That's still a tough sell. May, September, doesn't matter.
Who the fuck wants to see that shit?
I don't want to see that shit, and I don't know why they would think anyone wants to see that shit. Suppose that another way to look at it is, if you're Canelo Alvarez, and this is what Al Haymon is offering you. He's offering you Jermall Charlo, and you stand to make 8 figures pouncing on a scrub like him. Why wouldn't you?
Why?
Why wouldn't you take advantage the way any other fighter would take advantage in that situation? So often, we see a lot of altruism and idealism when these discussions are had. But that's not what actually happens. That's not how it plays out in the real world. And if Canelo were to take advantage in that situation, he's not doing anything that any other fighter wouldn't do in this sense of duty.
It's romanticism.
That's looking at the sport through rose-tinted lenses, because the reality of it is the alphabets aren't going to pressure Canelo Alvarez to do anything or fight anyone in particular, say David Benavidez, and apparently neither is Al Heyman, who promotes him.
Yeah, Sampson's is promoted by title, but Sampson's just a puppet. He don't call the shots.
Al Heyman does. And if Al Heyman himself isn't making that fight a priority, if he is not insistent that Canelo Alvarez fight that fighter,
Here we are.
maybe he doesn't want to rock the boat because he knows that he needs Canelo Alvarez for what few fight dates he has and making them work, making them count. He's just happy to have him, even if it's for a Jermall Charlo fight, which speaks to an even bigger problem that I've often addressed here on the channel, that you can have Canelo Alvarez for the next 2 fights, but that doesn't guarantee your survival. You did 2 very big shows last year, 2 of the biggest, if not the 2 biggest shows last year, in Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis and Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. Those were 2 of the bigger fights we saw.
But it wasn't enough to keep Showtime Boxing afloat. It didn't impress the people at Paramount, CEO Chris McCarthy.
They still gave them the axe due to what were poor metrics. They still gave them the boot in spite of those 2 very big shows. The surrounding shows on the perimeter were not as big, not as impressive, and that kind of an inconsistency.
You can have Canelo for your next 2 fights. And what?
The majority of your stable, which is an aging stable of guys anywhere in their mid-30s to early 40s, inactive fighters that are not ticket sellers, they're not well-known. Your average PBC fighter can't sell out a high school auditorium. That's saying that Lee Wood sells more in Nottingham and Josh Warrington sells more in Leeds than the vast majority of PBC fighters sell in their own hometowns.
Chris Billum Smith sells more in Bournemouth than the Charlo brothers do in Texas.
It's an example that accents a problem, a serious problem. Your stable is primarily a stable full of aging and inactive fighters and very few young upstarts. And how are you supposed to showcase their talent if you even had them when it seems like all of your fights are going to be behind a paywall? They're going to be on pay-per-view.
It's another problem.
It's not just a scarcity of fight dates for your more experienced and established fighters. Not having a regular schedule of fights, a regular schedule, not a bunch of pay-per-views.
Regular fights.
If you ain't got them, how are you supposed to develop your up-and-coming talent? If you even have up-and-coming talent, when and where are you supposed to showcase their abilities and allow them to grow their profile, grow in experience and marquee value so that one day they can be on pay-per-view? If they're buried on pay-per-view undercards already, very few people are going to see them.
As fewer and fewer people are buying pay-per-views in the American market.
It's a PBC's next wave of fighters. It's a PBC's next wave of premier boxing champions. We know what Top Rank's got. They've got a whole treasure trove of young fighters. Tiger Johnson, Abdullah Mason, Shushu Carrington, Richard Torres.
The Vargas kid, the list goes on.
Got plenty of young guys. So does Matchroom. So does Golden Boy.
What about the PBC?